Hello, and welcome to the Wild Blue Podcast, perspectives on aviation lives, lifestyles, and business.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Wild Blue Podcast. My name is Todd Minton, and I am seated with
Chris Kirk.
Chris. How are you doing today?
Good. Yeah, this is fun, Todd. These are some of my favorite things to do.
Yeah, it's always nice to get back together and do another podcast. And I thought today, we've kind of talked off and on about doing a podcast on physiological events, aviation physiological events. I should clarify that. And I know you have some good stories, and probably from your military flying days, as well as maybe other flying. And I can talk a little bit about some opportunities I had in the military in terms of aviation physiological training. So what do you think about that? Should we cover that today?
Yeah, the thing is that a lot of our listeners, a lot of our customers come from a purely civilian background, and there's a lot of guys in the upper echelons of aviation, been around for a long time, that have never had the opportunity to experience some of the training that you and I have. And I consider myself very blessed to have been able to take advantage of that and have been selected to go do that. But when it comes to learning about things that happen to your body and sensations that you're going to experience, we've seen a lot there, both in training and then in the real world. And I think a lot of the civilian guys see it in the real world, but sometimes they don't necessarily know what's going on or why that's happening, or moreover, to even be prepared for the possibility of it happening.
I remember as a 16-year-old student pilot reading, then you just could read the FAA produced material and reading about whether it's the leans or things of that nature, and then sort of relearning it as a flight instructor candidate trying to get my CFI in the mid-1980s. And I was, you're exactly right. As a civilian at that time, I didn't have any idea what some of this, how to really experience it or get good training in it. Thank you for the military. Thank you to the military, because that's, I think, where a lot of this particular discussion will lean to.
No pun intended.
No pun intended. Golly.
That was cheesy.
So I think that we both started off. I guarantee you went to pilot training. I went to navigator training, and the very first block of pilot training when you got there was called, do you remember? Aerospace Physiology.
Okay.
Yep, Aerospace Physiology. So I know that we both attended that, and that's still true today from our inside source, who is currently at pilot training.
So you remember some of the things that they did to you? I mean, I'm not going to say with you. They did them to you.
Yeah.
What did they do to you?
Well, we can talk about what do they call the Blarney chair or something?
The one that spins?
The one that spins?
Yeah. So
what was the purpose of that? But
that was one of those somatographic illusions that affect both your eyes and your ear. And I'm trying to remember. I remember that we would spin on the chair, and then you would try to focus on something, and you couldn't.
Yes.
You couldn't focus until your vestibular system settled down. But your eyes is that the one where your eyes would start twitching?
To twitch, yeah, I think that was it, yes.
And of course, the thought there was, especially in military airplanes, if you're doing like very fast aileron rolls, or if you get into a spin or anything like that.
One of the highlights of aerospace physiology was the opportunity to go to the altitude chamber.
Yeah.
And I know, man, that's something that I think every pilot, if there's any way you can find a way to get to an altitude chamber, because the FAA has, I know they offer things. I don't know how you get into it or whatever, but going to the altitude chamber. Let's talk about the altitude chamber for a little bit.
I don't know if they still do it or not. But through the FAA, I do remember in the past seeing at some of the military installations, the FAA, I don't know if they would contract with them or what, but they would hold those, what you're talking about.
Right.
Maybe that's something to look at, but.
So there are a limited number of places around the country where the Air Force has and I can't speak to the Navy. I don't know what they have, but the Air Force has the altitude chamber. And if for some reason you're not familiar with what we're talking about, an altitude chamber allows them to simulate the atmospheric pressure at higher altitudes, and then give the students who are in the chamber the opportunity to see what their hypoxia symptoms are by removing their oxygen mask and simulating to be at, say, 25,000 feet. They like to use a mid-altitude like that because if you're up a lot higher, you're going to be so quickly hypoxic, you won't even get to recognize your symptoms. But at 25,000 feet, you're going to last 45 seconds or a minute, maybe even longer, and it'll give you time to see what symptoms. Do you remember some of your symptoms of hypoxia?
Your vision starts narrowing. You get a little shortness of breath. It's very insidious.
It is.
In fact, I think the terms they used to use was it's an insidious onset.
Yes.
I
felt tingling in my fingers.
Right.
I remember that, and just kind of general confusion. And
more so than normal.
No, yeah. No, those are specific confusions. This was general confusion. But the purpose, of course, is that you would recognize the quote insidious onset of hypoxia and get your oxygen mask on before you lost or passed out.
Right.
You recall the Payne Stewart accident. Learjet, they left Florida and somehow all ended up hypoxic, and eventually it ran out of fuel up in North or South Dakota. I think North Dakota, and crashed, tragically killing all on board.
It's one of the things that I got out of that, and it wasn't even of a 25. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this was done like in the low to mid-teens, and they would they'd give you a color chart.
Yeah, yeah.
And they would slowly bring that altitude in the chamber up. You wouldn't have your oxygen mask on, and you would look at that color chart, and you would swear that you're not seeing anything different on the way up. And then they bring that chamber down pretty quickly and introduce all that oxygen back into your system. And that color chart just bang. I mean, the colors were just brilliant.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that, there's a lot of GA pilots who like to fly, 10, 11, 12,000 feet, maybe even a little higher without their oxygen. You're losing a lot of your sensation that you don't realize. The other day, where were we going? Oh, we were going down to see a customer. I had my daughter with me. And I thought, we were at 10, and I thought just to get above a little bit of the clouds there, we'll go up to 11.
Mm-hmm.
That 1,000 feet made such a difference. I started feeling the effects almost immediately.
Yeah.
And as soon as I did, you were IFR, I just talked to ATC. I said, we need to go back down to 10. Actually, I think we went back down to 9. That was an invaluable reminder to me that it doesn't take much to start experiencing.
And it's even worse at night.
Yeah.
To our listeners, I think that's a great reminder that you just don't want to mess around with this. It's easier to carry some oxygen or something if you want to fly at those 12,000 footish altitudes.
Yeah. But do you remember in the altitude? They probably, I don't know if they did this in nav training or not, but you would take they'd have a guinea pig, and the guinea pig wouldn't have his oxygen mask on, and they'd let some guy pass out, literally pass out. I don't even know if they still do this anymore. You'd let him pass out, and then we'd go over there, and we'd take his oxygen mask, and we would, and his uniform, we'd rearrange all of his patches, and, tie his hands together and all that kind of stuff, and then they bring oxygen back, and the guy's like, couldn't figure out what was going on.
Well, I think the great point of that, too, is the moment the oxygen's reintroduced, you're good. It's amazing how quick you recover.
Yeah.
There's a great YouTube video, and I suppose you could look it up by just looking up 4 of Spades, oxygen or something, and the guy, they're videotaping a student he keeps saying, 4 of Spades. He's holding there, asking, what card do you have, Lieutenant, or whatever, and 4 of Spades, 4 of Spades. He just says it over and over. It's the confusion. There usually would try to be one guy who's trying to be a hero. And, I'm fine, and he'd be the one that.
Yeah, there was always the macho guy that thought for some reason his system was going to be immune to that kind of stuff.
The thing was too, we did the oxygen chamber every 5 years. So I've been through it, I don't know, 5-6 times in my career. So.
And how about the rapid decompressions?
Yeah, they did that. At least way back, I remember doing that. But
that's pretty invaluable too, to see how quickly what your time of useful consciousness is. If you're flying at 30,000 feet or 35, what is it, 18 seconds maybe?
Yeah,
you've got.
Yeah.
You've
got to get the quick dawn oxygen mask on right away if you're at a high altitude like that. But so many, you may not think that matters as a general aviation pilot, but it certainly, like we talked about, operating in those low to mid altitudes, you have to be aware of the insidious onset of. So that's kind of the.
I don't think even passengers pay enough attention to that. You'll sit in the back of an airplane. Oh well, if you remember, a couple of years back when the Southwest they had their incident with the engine and it penetrated the fuselage.
Sure. Yeah.
And some of these, excuse my term, but just frankly, ding dong passengers that are sitting in the back, they're more concerned about their time on YouTube or on social media, and they're back there talking, like, oh, we're gonna, whatever. But they get, where do they have their oxygen mask on? They got it only on their mouth, but not on their nose.
I know it. I see those pictures, like, folks, pay attention, please.
Yeah.
Please, it's unlikely, but it could happen. So what other physiological incidents can we talk about that are, I think we've all at times in an airplane had a little bit of I don't know about even the leans, just a minor bit of, do you ever have a moment where you had a little bit of dizziness or something, and
you get that,
maybe you bent over and pick something up, and
that's a good one. Yep. You get that acceleration, deceleration.
Yeah.
So when
I hate that.
When your ears are still trying to adjust to the momentum changes there, and you think you're accelerating really fast, and you stop that acceleration, but you still feel like the airplane is going up. You experience the same thing on a roller coaster, for that matter.
Right.
So a lot. One of them is, and I had this the other day too. Is you get like that. A sloping cloud deck, and then all of a sudden you're over that sloping cloud deck long enough where you start thinking that is the horizon line, and it's very subtle. Doesn't take much.
It throws you off, and it can last. I know we all say trust your instruments, and that's what you have to do. Of course, then separately, if you ever have an instrument problem and everything else is okay, you better cover up that attitude indicator, because that'll also jack with you.
Well, that's okay. Can I tell a quick story?
Yeah,
Actually, probably not a quick story, but so you brought up the attitude or the instrument problem. So years ago, I was a T-38 instructor, and we were doing a night formation sortie. Had a ceiling, and it was, I think, probably 1,000 feet thick. It was clear skies above. I was flying with a student he was a decent student, but not a real strong student at the same time. And night formation in the T-38 was always a challenge.
Yeah, anyway. That would have been hard.
And in the weather, in the clouds, it was just it's just not my favorite thing. Felt pretty good about it when you got it done. So anyway, we would go out. This was down at Vance Air Force Base, and the way it worked at night is you take off, you'd go out, you do some just some air work, so you do some steep turns, and with your wingman on your wing, and you'd get up and just give them the sensation of what it's like to fly on another wing at night, close proximity. And we'd play with the burners a little bit so the students could see the cool effects of the afterburners going. And we would fly I think it was a DME arc around the TACAN there in Enid. And then you'd come back and you'd recover, and if the weather was good, you'd split up and maybe do a couple of patterns. But the weather this night wasn't good enough for that, so we came back, and I still remember the guy. I was on the wing with my student. You took off one way and landed another. So I had, I think we led on the way out, and then we were on the wing on the way back. And Jerry Kirshner, I still remember Jerry. I wonder what he's doing these days. Jerry was the IP in the other 38. We're both in the back seats. Our students are up front. And so we were going to come back and do a wing approach. And we're coming into 3-5. Gosh, some of this I still remember like it was yesterday. We're coming in to runway 3-5 there at Vance and Enid.
And it's like 1,000 overcast.
About 1,000 overcast, and that overcast deck. I don't even think it was 1,000 feet thick, because let me set the stage here. It was a moonless night.
Yeah.
The stars were brilliant. It was winter.
Mm-hmm.
Stars were brilliant, and the cloud deck was thin enough that you could see light spots on the cloud deck.
Sure, yeah, I know.
From and it was low enough.
Yeah,
so you'd see you'd see where the cities were, the towns were, be just a little bit of a light spot. And so, not unlike being underneath that cloud deck, like if you're standing out at the airport or at home, on an overcast night, and you look up and you can see kind of where the towns are because they're the glow on the clouds.
Yeah, exactly.
So, except you're on the opposite side. So anyway, we come down and we're in a left turn to intercept the localizer, and about that time we go into the tops of the clouds, and so all of a sudden, it happened pretty quick. Started experiencing the leans, and at this point, if I recall correctly, I was the one flying the airplane. I was, we had passed the point. In fact, I don't even think it was part of the student thing. It was to fly in the wing on the weather like this. So I'm flying on the wing. We're in this left-hand turn, and I start getting the leans. But I'm just paying attention to the guy next to us. Mm-hmm. And so I start getting that. And then, I don't know if you can find this online or not, but it was in our physiological books. There was a sensation called giant hand.
Yes.
Do you remember giant hand?
Yes.
You remember what it does?
It feels like you're being pulled by the giant hand, right?
Yeah, like there's a hand on your hand almost.
Pulling you. Anyway,
and so all of a sudden I felt like I could not move the stick on that airplane. Like there was something else controlling the stick on that airplane.
Oh, my.
So immediately I broke out of that formation because I was like, I can't do this. So we broke out. I rolled wings level. Now keep in mind, I've been looking at lead most of the time. I'd cross-check my attitude indicator just real quick occasionally, but most of my concentration's on lead.
Yeah.
So I broke out. I rolled wings level on our attitude indicator. Immediately, I noticed something didn't seem quite right. We pitched up. I don't know how many degrees it was. It was probably no more than 20 degrees nose high, and we came blitzing out at the top of those clouds. So now I can see, right? But my sensation was, and I had no idea what this was until I looked it up a little bit ago. I called it upside down itis, but my sensation was that the stars were the lights on the ground.
Oh, yes.
And those spots,
yes,
those spots on the clouds were those cities reflecting.
Yes.
And so I felt like I was upside down. I've since found out it's called an inversion sensation. But so the whole time I'm sitting there, Todd, and I'm telling myself, literally, keep on the attitude indicator, keep on the attitude indicator, keep on the attitude indicator, and it was correct with what the standby was showing. And then, so I did, and then almost like clap of the hands, boom, I was okay.
Oh, really?
I mean, it just all went away. Once my.
So what did Jerry Kirshner say when hey, where'd you go, Chris?
Well, come to find out, they were having an attitude indicator problem. They were off when they were in that bank. They were showing 30 degrees, which is a standard rate turn in the 38. Sure. They were doing nearly 60 degrees of bank.
Oh, no wonder you. Oh my gosh.
So, and I didn't catch that as I'm just double, I'm kind of cross-checking. And now your
student didn't say, hey, we're kind of steep here.
Nope, he never said anything.
Did you ever, and you didn't have to tell him, you recovered quickly enough apparently that you didn't have to tell him to take the airplane.
No. He was, for whatever reason at the time, I chose to keep flying it, and he was kind of, students in the T-38 had somewhat of a tendency to get a little bit behind the 8-ball. The plane moved so fast.
Yeah, I don't doubt it.
So we ended up landing, and then Jerry Kirshner tells me about all this, and then I start telling him about what happened out there. But I had the leans, I had the giant hand, I had that inversion thing, all on one probably within a matter of 2 or 3 minutes, if
Yeah.
not less. And so just a really weird.
That's a crazy story. And I would imagine now once things start to go south, that then anything could come on at that point. I mean, maybe that's what led to one thing led to the other. Of course, the fact that it was the perfect scenario for the night where you had the cloud deck below you that was lit up and the brilliant stars above you. It was a perfect setup for that particular.
Might even have been
illusion.
What's the one where you are, like part of the problem I have been, because we did pitch up when I pitched over to level attitude. That might have contributed to it too, with that, the acceleration of my ears feeling like we were still going up, which is why I kept having to tell myself, no, you're level. Don't trust what you're feeling at all.
Yeah. Anytime, even daylight, the clouds, I mean, the challenge, and even flying, bigger airplanes as we do, sometimes breaking in and out of the clouds and you're climbing a little bit, it kind of throws you because you see this stuff, even though you're looking at your instruments, out of the peripheral vision, you see things happen, and that's when you can start to have those kind of problems. But you were set up in that story pretty bad with the 60-degree bank. That had to be, wow.
And I think that they were probably only momentarily at that bank, but the whole time they were in the clouds, they figured out that right at the worst time is when their attitude system started failing.
Yeah, that's really an eye-opening story. No pun intended. I mean, that really is. I mean, that is scary. Any other illusions or other stories that you have that along these lines?
Most of them are just going to be like things that you experience on a daily basis. Just a lot of the leans and a lot of things like that. So much of it for us came in some of those formation scenarios when you had no horizon that you could see. Even at day VMC, you're doing 90-degree turns essentially. Trying to think what the maneuver was we called it. We were just out in the, just doing real gentle turns, but they were still 90 degrees of bank, and you'd lose perspective, especially when you're on the downside looking up.
Yeah.
And you'd really just start feeling those things. We just beat into our students' heads, beat into our heads. You got to trust your instruments. Do not go off the seat of the pants.
If you've never flown formation, it is a challenging activity. And I, as a navigator in my military career, and in flying big airplanes, C-130s, we have a 2,000-foot separation between airplanes, so it's definitely formation, but it's not like what you're talking about, wingtip stuff and the T-38. I have since done some of that with a bonanza group called the Beach Nuts and done some formation flying, and I've just come to the realization that, man, I have a lot of respect for guys that did it like yourself. It is not easy. And to our listeners, it doesn't matter if you're a relatively low-time private pilot. If there may be, some Mooney guys do it, Bonanza guys do it, fly formation, but when you're flying formation, you're looking across the cockpit, things of that nature. That's a setup for getting into a bit of illusion. I did have it happen, a little bit, a couple, because when you're turning, like you're talking about, and your job as a wingman is to watch lead, and that's what your job is. I mean, that is it.
Yeah.
That's number 1, 2, and 3. You really have to. You can't get into situations where it messes with your inner ear or whatever and throws you off a bit. So formation flying is really where that can happen.
And if you're by yourself and you're in the weather and you experience this, if you have a second attitude source, always double check that. But also, if you have the ability to pop an autopilot on, that's what that autopilot's for. Put that thing on, get yourself recaged, and then if you like hand flying, click it back off afterwards. But utilize those tools that you've got. But again, I'd encourage you, both Todd and I would, if you have the ability to take some of these classes and with instructors. I'm not a big online class fan because you don't get a lot of the corporate knowledge from actually listening to somebody go through their stories and asking them those in-person questions. And an altitude chamber you can never do, online. You've got to be there to experience that. But take advantage of that.
And they'll offer other. There is a lot of physiological. I don't want to say incidents, but angles, I guess, that whether it's altitude chamber or this stuff we're talking about, that's losing your balance, so to speak. I mean, there's others, vision things that are just like night vision, stuff like that. There's a lot of interesting physiological issues in aviation. So hopefully.
How about the night approach into a runway that's got nothing around it?
Yeah, and that's a common general aviation thing right there. That really is something that I think we all could potentially run into as pilots, no matter what kind of aircraft you're flying, as long as you're flying at night. That's a great point.
Just as a sidebar to that, so years ago, when I proposed to my wife, it was down at Cedar Key in Florida.
Yeah, I've been there.
And so it's got like a 2,200-foot runway, water at one end. But if you remember, there's a sign, and the sign mentions something about checking your attitude source because you're taking off over that dark water. And I guess there've been a number of guys that right into the water because it's an instrument takeoff. It really is. It could be VFR, but you have nothing out there to work with.
Yes, no horizon, nothing. It just blends in together. Water to sky. So that's a good point. There's even more, I don't know, hopefully our listeners have found this at least a bit thought-provoking, if not interesting, to things they should consider. I'm sure that some unexplained accidents have been ultimately, or even guys that have lost control of an aircraft at altitude and ultimately, the airplane broke apart due to extreme maneuvering or something. But in reality, it started probably with a guy getting out of, not trusting his instruments or whatever it may have been, So, and I know those accidents do. A few of them happen every year. So, hopefully you found this topic to be interesting. And if you want to learn more about it, I'm sure Chris would talk to you, or I certainly would. But you can call us at Wild Blue Aircraft Sales, 888-773-4249, or just dial direct 816-479-2723, planes at Fly Wild Blue, our website, flywildblue.com. So we'd love to talk to you about flying or airplanes. It's what we like to do. So again, I hope you've enjoyed today's podcast. We appreciate your listenership and look forward to talking to you in the coming weeks on future podcasts.
Thanks, Todd.
Thanks for listening to the Wild Blue Podcast. Find us online at flywildblue.com. And don't forget to subscribe and share.